Aloha kako. Today we're going to be talking about exceptions with methods. So without further ado, let me go ahead and open up our textbook here. So when we're talking about methods, up until now, we've been usually handling our exceptions within the code that throws an error or throws the exception. What happens though if you don't want to handle it the same way all the time? Well, in that case, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pull the exception handling outside of the method that we're using that's going to be throwing it. So by doing that, we're going to have to make a couple of changes here. We're going to have to go ahead in the code where the exception is happening. We're going to have to put in a throws clause. So we put in a throws clause, and it's a sample right here. We put in a throws clause at the definition specification for the function. So you'll notice that over here we have public static double get area scanner throws exception. So you'll need to put throws exception here, and you can put a comma and then have multiple types of exceptions that this method can actually throw. So if you have like exception is the catch-all, remember that's the base type here for exception, but you can have specific ones in here as well if you have like input mismatch type, things like that. So you can specify multiple ones here, but the exception can be used as a catch-all to get all types of exceptions. So we're going to take a look at the participation activity right here. We're going to go ahead and start this up. And it tells us here that the getArea method may throw an exception that is not handled within the method. So in other words, we're going through our code here, and then we throw the new exception. Once we throw this, let's go ahead and hit the next. So the throw clause indicates the method may throw an exception that should be handled by the calling code. So because we say here, what we're doing is we're passing this exception back up to the method that calls it, or the whatever calls on it. So the throws exception just means that we're going to take this, we're going to kind of bubble it up to the next, to the caller. Now the main method, which calls getArea, uses a try catch block to catch and handle the exception thrown by area. So as it's running here, it asks for the user's input. They get the negative 3.14. That's less than 0. So we're going to throw the exception. And the exception isn't handled here within getArea. It then goes up to the calling function, which is the static void main here. So it gets handled over here in the catch section. So this is where it's actually handled. Even though it was in the method that we called on, it's going to be handled at the higher area. And we'll talk about in a little while what happens if it's called from another function and not necessarily the main. So we'll get into that too. So over here, we have participation activity that's going to kind of help you understand the nuances of it. So if you look at this, which throw clause specifies that mine coins may throw an exception of type exception. So you look in here, you see public static void mine coins throws new exception. You've got, so what you're doing really is you're identifying that which one of these is correct syntax. So we know it's throws. It's not throws new. You're not creating a new object there. So you would go here. Then which throws clause specifies exceptions of type exception and file not found exception. So when you look in here, we've got file not found exception. We've got exception file. This doesn't have a comma in between, so we'd specify that it has to have a comma. So this right here, you go ahead and click on this, and it tells you correct. And which throw clause does not compile for a method that may throw exceptions of type file not found exception and input mismatch exception. Well, we know that here exception will handle either one of these. Input mismatch would not, because we're missing one, and then we've got these both specified. So this one right here is the one that would not. So now we talk about checked versus unchecked exceptions. Okay, this is a very important part. So checked exceptions have to be handled or else it won't compile. So it says here, a checked exception is an exception where the programmer is expected to handle within the program. If a method includes code that may throw a checked exception, the Java compiler ensures that the method catches the exception or declares the exception is thrown. So an example of that is going to be a program that opens a file should anticipate and handle a file not found exception. An unchecked exception, though, is an exception that a programmer is not expected to catch and handle at runtime. So the Java compiler does not ensure unchecked exceptions are handled by a program. So an example of that is going to be like the program should try to eliminate code that uses null references instead of actually catching and handling using the null pointer exception. So Java's catch or specify requirement requires methods to either catch a checked exception using a catch block or specify that the method throws the exception using a throws clause. Code that does not obey the rule or specify requirement does not compile. So what we're going to have to do is, in the case that we've got a method that calls another method, so if the method that we're calling on is throwing these exceptions and not handling it themselves in their own try and catch. If they're throwing it, in other words, bubbling it up to the caller, then the caller either has to handle it, or if that's a method, they have to themselves put in a throws clause that's going to pass it up from there as well, so it can be handled at the more higher level. So over here, we're going to look in the participation activity. We start. So the file input constructor may throw the file not found exception, which is a checked exception. Some file must either catch or specify file found exception in the throws clause. So because it's a checked one, you have to handle it either inside the code here or in the calling one. So what we're seeing here is we're going to throw the file not found exception so that it's not handled here within the sum file. It's got to be handled up here. And if it's not handled up here, it's not going to compile. So then scanner's next int method may throw an input mismatch exception, which is an unchecked exception. Catching or specifying an unchecked exception in a throws clause is optional. So because we have over here an input mismatch exception, they're saying that it's, they're throwing it along with the file not found exception, but because it's an unchecked one, it doesn't have to be handled necessarily in the calling function, which is main. So keep that in mind. If it's one of the types that's, if it's of the type that's checked, a checked exception, you do have to handle it. If it's an unchecked type, you don't have to handle it. And we'll talk about what type falls under which in just a minute. So code that calls some file must catch or specify the file not found exception, but the input mismatch exception, as we talked about, is optional. So you look over here, it runs the sum file, it calls on some file, and then it catches the file not found exception. So here, as I said earlier, these are the common unchecked exceptions. We have null pointer exceptions, index out of bounds exceptions. We talked about that previously, like when you have an array that's specified from, you think it's got 10 spaces in it. You go from 0 to 9, but you're actually, when you're running your program, you go 1 to 10. The 1's going to be okay all the way up to 9. 10 is going to break it, though. That'll give you an index out of bounds exception. And those you technically don't have to catch because they are common. It's one of the common unchecked exceptions. Arithmetic exception, like division by 0, integer division by 0, not double. That would give you an N. But these arithmetic exceptions, those are unchecked exceptions. IO error, so these indicate the failure of an IO operation. So that you don't have to check for. Class cast exception. Casting is basically when you're trying to convert one type to another. You don't have to handle the class cast exceptions. And then we've got the illegal argument exception, and that's for illegal or inappropriate method arguments. So you don't have to catch those as well. And then we have our participation activity here. So which throw clause does not compile for a method that may throw exceptions of type file not found exception null pointer. So you're using the knowledge that you just learned about which ones are checked versus which ones are unchecked or are unchecked to answer these questions here. So I'll let you do these on your own. So throwing exceptions in methods, calling other methods. Again, I did mention that up above that you have to handle them depending on the way you're setting up your throws and everything. So you'll have to handle it in the the calling function. So a method may call another method with the throws call. If the calling method, in other words, if the one that's calling on the other method does not handle the exception thrown by the method, then the calling method, if it's not going to actually handle it, then it itself has to have the throw uh, uh, clause in there that's going to throw the same methods or throw the same exceptions that the one it called on was also throwing. So I know that's really confusing sounding. So essentially, if method A is calling on method B, method A is throwing, let's say, two different types of exceptions, then the one that's calling on it either has to handle it in a catch block or it needs to itself throw the same ones so it'll bubble up to the next, the next calling level. So the program below uses hierarchical method calls to print the speed up of the average time value in two files. So it talks about how the calc average input val method may throw an exception of type exception while reading from a scanner because calc average speed up calls on calc average input val and does not catch the exception type. The throws call for calc average speed up must specify the type exception. So it has to have the same throw, or it has to allow for the same exceptions that the one that it called on was throwing. So sounds confusing, but if you look at it, it's a little bit easier to understand. So here you have calc average input val. It's throwing exception. So you see where it throws exception right here. So the code that's actually going to call on data time speed up, which if we do a quick search for it in here, we'll see it. Dun, dun, dun. Oops, sorry. So, oh wait, this is actually the one that we want to find. So we see that it's called here in calc average speed up. So this is calling on this one. We're not handling it here. We're not doing the exception handling here. So we'll go to the method that's calling on it. We look at the method that's calling on it, and you see that it does not have any handling in here. So because of that, it also has to throw the exception over here. So it has to, because this one itself is doing file input output, it is throwing the file not found exception, but it's also throwing the exception for the function that it's calling. So this will bubble up to here and go up to the whatever is calling on calc average speed up. If you look at calc average speed up and you look for that, it's called from here in main. So at the main level, you're accountable for the file not found exception and the exception as well that's thrown here in the one that's essentially for I guess, yeah, this is for number values that are less than 0. So in the main, you're going to handle both of those cases. File not found exception here and the exception for the number being less than 0. So it just means that, and just keep this in mind, essentially what you need to do is when you've got a method that calls another method, if you're not handling the exception that it's thrown here in the calling function, then you need to have the same throws, the same exceptions thrown as the calling one, plus whatever ones you have within your own code, and then it'll be handled at the higher level that calls it. So that's what I want you to keep in mind. And then the participation activity here, you're going to get into, looking at the hierarchical method calls, and it's going to ask you, it's going to quiz you to just test your knowledge of, what we've done up there. So when you look at it, method A, which throws clause correctly specifies the minimum required exception types for each scenario. Assume that method A calls method B. So keep in mind the word minimum here. That's going to be important. So method A does not handle any exceptions. So method A is calling method B. Method A itself isn't handling B's exceptions, so it's going to have to throw the same things that B throws. So here it says method B may throw exceptions of type file not found exception and input mismatch exception. So let's think about that. So out of those, we know that one's checked and one's unchecked, right? So file not found exception is a checked one that's required to, and input mismatch is not required to, but we need to pass those up. So could we get away with the throws file not found exception? That sounds good. Oh, wait, hold on. What is the question again? So which throws clause correctly specifies? Okay, so correctly specifies. So we should have in here we know that input mismatch exception is not correct because we know that we've got to handle the file not found as well. And file not found is checked. Input mismatch is unchecked. So, so let's see. Would it be file not found exception, or would it be the input mismatch exception, file not found exception? So let's go ahead and look. And this is no, and it's no because you're looking for the minimum. And like that's what I talked about up here. You're looking for the minimum. So technically, you could have gotten away with this because the input mismatch exception it's unchecked. It's not required. So you could have gotten away with doing just this. This could work, but this is the answer that they're looking for. So keep that in mind. And that comes into account in some of the others as well. So look through here and work on that. And then the last thing in here is our challenge activity. Our challenge activity, like before, you're going to go ahead and start on this. Complete the throws clause to find or to specify that find manufacturer year may throw an exception of type exception. So go in here, look at it. You're going to go ahead and add your code here to specify what you're going to throw, and that should do it. So you go ahead and check on check, and then go to the second one, and that would complete it. And that's all that we have in this section on exceptions with methods. So if you have any questions, this is a little bit confusing. The main thing to keep in mind, again, the throws clause that we're going to be using, and that passes it up so that you can handle it in another section of code. That allows for you to handle exceptions differently depending on where it's called from. If you have different, if you have a reason to throw an exception, do one thing in one area or handle it differently in another area, that's nice and convenient. Also remember that you have checked versus unchecked. So there's a responsibility to actually handle it or not handle it. So remember that. And then remember that you've got certain types of unchecked exceptions, and these are those. And then just remember that when you're calling one from another, that the calling method, the method, if the method throws the exceptions and the calling method doesn't plan to actually handle the exception, then it too has to have its throw. It has to have the throws clause in there matching or at least incorporating the ones from the method that it called on so that it can bubble that up to the next level. Okay, so those are the main points from here. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, send me an email. We can set up a Zoom. I can go over this with you in more detail. But otherwise, I will see you in the next section. Aloha.